Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Everyone, this is Mr. Middlepath, and inshallah you guys are all doing well. This video is a video response to Shahid Bolson and the Middle Nation channel, a channel which I appreciate their content very much. I watch it a lot. If I was a world leader, or if I was leader of a country, I would have hired Shahid Bolson to be my analyst and to be my advisor. I love his videos that much. I especially love the refreshing and unique perspective that he comes to with these topics. However, that being said, there are a number of points that he's made that I disagree with very sharply, and in the interest of a wider Muslim discourse, because these are very important topics, I wanted to publicly push back on these topics so that I can have a better conversation and a better understanding. And I think because his points are made publicly, that they should also be talked about publicly. So point number one that I wanted to discuss is that he mentioned that Palestinians should give up all territorial claims to the land in exchange for full Israeli citizenship. And his reasoning behind that is that Palestinians outweigh Israelis in terms of population, so they'll be able to outvote them anyways. Demographically, Israelis are going down. Demographically, Palestinians are having a population increase. And I think this is a very naive position to hold, with all due respect, because when in history have we ever seen, that a strong minority cedes power to a weaker majority population? We don't have that in Syria, where Bashar al-Assad's Alawi people were running the government. They didn't just cede their power to the majority Sunnis. We don't see that in South Africa, where the white, at least without a fight, that the white people there, 8% of the population, just ceded their power to the 80% majority black people that were there. And even after there was a revolution in South Africa, you still had a lot of economic disparity and power in the hands of white people, although there is a black party now running the government in South Africa. So the idea that Israelis will just hand over power to the Palestinians because they outnumber them, and they will let them outvote them, even and not create some type of loophole laws that will keep Israel in power, I think we need to push back on this idea and say this idea doesn't make sense, especially when we look at it in the light of history. The second thing that we need to talk about is the denial of the Uyghur concentration camps. If I'm misrepresenting your position, I want to apologize, but I remember what you were saying from your video, something to the effect of we can't trust Western media when it comes to what China's doing to the Uyghurs. And I think we have to push back on this very strongly. And you might even owe an apology to the Uyghur people for throwing them under the bus like that, because I've actually spoken with at least one Uyghur person, a little kid, who's talking about his family and what his family's going through. And I asked him, is everything that's going there true? And he said, yes, it is. The idea that we had so much independent sources and telegram posts and posts from China saying what they're going through, saying how the Uyghur people are being married off to Han Chinese, saying how the Chinese are destroying their culture, destroying their homes, taking scholars and putting them into prison and so forth, and the massive amount of abuse that's going on in the Uyghur area. It's a fact. It's not even a matter of propaganda. It's actually a fact now, and this is confirmed outside of Western media sources. So I'm actually surprised and shocked for saying that it's not actually happening. The second thing is, and again, forgive me if I'm misrepresenting your position, inshallah you can respond with a video, is the idea that governments treat Muslims bad because Muslims themselves have attached separatist movements with Islam. And I think that that is partially true, but it's also an unfair analysis that you gave, because some people have a legitimate reason of why they want to separate from that government. Those legitimate reasons might include some unbearable types of tyranny, or some natural right or a God-given right to self-defense against that government. Again, but the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says that you be patient with the ruler if they beat your back and take your wealth. There's nothing in the hadith that says you be patient with the ruler if they rape your woman and kill your children. There's a natural right to self-defense, and if people feel like that power is being abused and that they can defend themselves, they should, and they will. And again, this is not a blanket statement that every people that feel like they're being abused should revolt against their government. There may be a situation where they have to be patient, and there may be a situation where they don't have to be patient and they can just fight back if they can. One example is the Taliban fighting against the Americans. At the time, they were fighting against the puppet government that was placed into the transitional government was done in 2001, and in 2003 you had the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Everyone was saying this is a legitimate government, despite the fact that it was a puppet government. They called the Taliban Khawarij. After the Taliban won, everyone went quiet. All the pro-state people went quiet and said, well, we don't really know too much about the Taliban. We don't really know too much about the situation. The Taliban of today are different than the Taliban of yesterday. Had the Taliban lost, we would not have heard the end of it. These are Khawarij fighting against legitimate rulers, so on and so on and so on. My point isn't that they're right. My point is that you don't seem to be representing the Uyghur situation in a comprehensive way. They may have a legitimate reason why they were trying to separate from China. Different groups may have a reason why they want to separate from a country that's abusing them. And other groups may not have legitimate reasons why they want to separate from a country that's abusing them. And maybe they're going to cause more harm than good. The situation is unique to each population and what they're going through. So I don't think it's fair to do that. And another idea that you have mentioned repeatedly in your videos is that when the Ottoman Empire fell and there was a transition to secular governments, that the life of the people didn't change much. Now I have to push back extremely hard against this idea because this is not true whatsoever. These secular governments, and especially during the communist era, the secular governments had a very aggressive anti-Islam program and reformed the education system. I mean, you're talking about removing Arabic letters in the Turkish language that Ataturk implemented. You're talking about throwing people in prison for wearing hijab, and you're talking about throwing people in prison for praying too much, right, or going to the masjid too much. They would be seen as suspicious. So the idea that everyday life didn't change is not true. Even if we accept your argument that the villages, people in the villages still wore hijab, and people in the cities, it changed there, it still doesn't change. Because where do most people go to get their jobs? Where do most people go for opportunities? Where is most of the population in a country located? In the cities, in the major city areas. So the idea that, hey, that's fine because fast forward 30 years later, we have an Islamic revival, so who cares what the rulers did, also is not fully true. Some countries like Kazakhstan are very ignorant in Islam, aren't very well practiced, can't access the knowledge easy, and still have Islam repressed. So the idea that some Muslim countries got lucky and were able to revive the deen, that's a mercy from Allah. That's not a proof. That's not a proof that it was okay for these governments to do what they did. So I think these positions need to be pushed back against. I would like to hear a response from you if you have one for these issues, because these are very important issues. And in part 2, inshallah, I'm going to talk a little bit about Saudi Arabia and how you present Saudi Arabia as the great hope for the Muslim Ummah. If any of this came off as offensive, my apologies. But this is done for the sake of all of us to have a good discussion on this matter and a productive discussion on this matter. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.